call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee of the Metropolitan Council for October 20th, 2025. I'm the chair, Councilmember Robert Lilligren. We are joined by a quorum of the committee. We do have 4 absences from committee members today. So thank you, committee members, for being here. Just briefly, the land and water acknowledgement, the Metropolitan Council acknowledges that the land we currently call Minnesota, and specifically the 7-county region, is the ancestral homeland of the Dakota Oyate, who are present and active contributors to our thriving region. As part of the Metropolitan Council's commitment to address the unresolved legacy of genocide, dispossession, and settler colonialism, and the fact that government institutions, including the Metropolitan Council, benefited economically, politically, and institutionally after the forcible removal of the Dakota Oyate, the Metropolitan Council is dedicated to instilling land, water, and people commitments in regional policy. These commitments support the Dakota Oyate, the 11 federally recognized tribes in Minnesota, Ho-Chunk Nation, and the American Indian communities, representing over 150 diverse tribal nations that call the 7-county region home. So we are called to order. Council members, you have an agenda in front of you. If there's no changes, additions, corrections, or discussion, we'll just consider it approved. It's approved. Next on the agenda is the approval of the October 6, 2025 Community Development Committee meetings. Is there a motion, please?
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Thank you, council members Chambliss, Carter. Any discussion on the minutes, additions, corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Committee members, will move on to our consent business. 2 items on the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve, please?
So moved.
Thank you, council members Carter and Chambliss. Any discussion on the consent agenda? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Great. We'll move into our information items. The first is a discussion of the 2026 payment standards for Metro HRA Rent Assistance Program. And we have Ms. Smith, and maybe you'll introduce the rest of your team. Terry, you kind of looked at me like you were surprised when I introduced that agenda. I went, okay.
No, I don't want to be doom and gloom up here tonight, so I'm like,
Okay.
we're going to sprinkle in some happiness.
All right, I appreciate that. So Terry has Ms. Hamrock and Mr. Victory
Yes.
from her team. Welcome.
Thank you for having us, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Terry Smith, and I am the director of the Metro HRA here at the council. And I'm here with my colleagues, Caitlin Hamrock, who's a principal data scientist in research, and Steve Victory, who's a business systems analyst in the HRA. So did a lot of prep for this presentation and for our discussion today. Also would like to credit our HRA managers who helped do some of this analysis, and also Brenda Jepson, who's a financial analyst in the admin and budget team. So it's a real group effort here, but we're going to be kind of passing back and forth as we chat with you today. But I just have sort of an introductory slide here. Payment standards, as you will recall, are rent limits used in the operation of the Section 8 and other rent assistance programs. Payment standards are limited by fair market rents, which are issued each year by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. When new fair market rents come out, payment standards must be adopted that are between 90 and 110% of the newly issued fair market rents. And then these are used to calculate maximum rents for voucher holders as they're out shopping for a rental unit. And so just with that limited background, I'm going to pass to Caitlin, who's going to share some information on what's happening in the rental market.
Thank you, Terry. I'm going to share some data that will explore trends in rents across the region. First, I'm going to give away the whole plot, so spoiler alert. I'm going to share with you some key takeaways, and then I'm going to talk through the data that we looked at that led us to these conclusions. So first, we're seeing that rents are still increasing. They're increasing fastest for our most affordable units, and they're increasing faster in our region than in other regions nationwide. We're seeing rent burden become more common and more severe among households in the area. And we also see a lot of important variation in rent growth trajectories by region and then by type of unit, so class of apartment. So what do things look like today? All the rental data I'm going to share with you today comes from CoStar, and it's data from 2025, quarter two of 2025, and then from previous years as well for comparison. But I shared these numbers on the screen today just for context, just so that we have some numbers to think about when we delve further into the data. These are median rents by class of apartment on the left-hand side, and then by number of bedrooms on the right-hand side. So the left side shows that Class A apartments have the highest median rents. These are going to be new builds, luxury apartments, lots of amenities. Median rent for these kinds of units is about $2,000 a month. This goes all the way then to Class C apartments. So with each additional class, these are older buildings, fewer amenities. So Class C apartments are most affordable units at about $1,200 a month. So across all different classes of apartments, $1,650 a month is our median rent. On the right-hand side, not too surprising, rents increase with additional bedrooms, starting at about $1,150 a month for a studio, all the way up to about $2,000 a month for a 3-bedroom unit. And this is across the entire region, and then all classes of apartments as well. So we saw on the last slide that rents as dollars per month vary by class, but we see that rent growth is also varying differently by class of apartment. So Class C apartments are our most affordable apartments. That's the red line across the top here. We've seen a 51% increase in the cost of Class C apartments since 2010. We've seen a 40% increase in Class B apartments during that same time frame, and a 24% increase for Class A apartments during that time. So what does this mean? Rent has increased most among our most affordable units, and that this trend is becoming more pronounced over time. Those gaps are widening with each additional year. So as someone is looking for an apartment, rent, obviously, is a very important thing to consider, but another is availability or vacancy. What's out there for them to even be able to rent. So this chart can help characterize what kind of rental market someone will encounter depending on the type of unit they're looking for by looking at both vacancy and rent. So we see on the left-hand side, Class A apartments, that line, the solid line across the top is rent that is steadily increasing over the last 15 years. And then the dashed line below it is vacancy. We can see a lot of variability in the vacancy rates for Class A apartments. This is as brand new buildings go up, as these large multi-unit buildings are built, they don't fill up immediately. So with each quarter, there's going to be a lot of fluctuation in availability. Class B, we're seeing still some variability, but certainly not as much as with Class A apartments. And we see also just sort of that steady increase in rent with the solid line. I will note here that the line, that solid line is steeper. So again, these rents are increasing faster for Class B apartments than Class A apartments. And then looking over on the right-hand side with Class C apartments, that's going to be the steepest of the solid lines. So rents increasing fastest for Class C apartments. And there's very little variability from quarter to quarter, from year to year in vacancy rates for these apartments. You don't see those big spikes. And one other thing to note here is that we have the lowest vacancy rates for Class C apartments as well. So this is going to be sort of the tightest market that you can encounter with the fewest available units to rent. So, sorry, the takeaway here is twofold. The rental market someone will encounter will look very different depending on the type of unit that you're looking for. And the rental market is tight and consistently tight for our most affordable units. So next, there is a lot on this slide, but we're going to walk through it piece by piece. Generally, what we're looking at is rent burden by income status between 2019 on the left and 2024 on the right. So all the other data is CoStar data. This is data from the ACS, and it's just talking about rent burden. So each bar represents an income group. Less than 35,000, sorry, the font on this is pretty small. Less than 35,000 is gonna be that first bar, 35 to 49,000, 50,000 to 74, 74 to 99, and then 100,000 or more. Within each bar, the orange portion of the bar are individuals who are rent burdened, so they're spending more than 30% of their income on rent. The red portion are individuals who are severely rent burdened, so they're spending more than 50% of their income on rent. So looking just at the, less than 35,000 group, we see that the size of the overall bar has kind of stayed the same. About 86% of that income category is some kind of rent burden. But what has changed is that the proportion that is severely rent burdened has increased from 55% to 66%. So our next income group, those people who make between 35 and 49,000, the overall bar has gone up 54% to 77%. Of that income group now experiencing some kind of rent burden. There are more individuals that are both rent burdened and severely rent burdened at this income level. So the next group, these are people making between $50,000 and $75,000 a year. This is just out of college entry-level job. This is single earner household level income, and the proportion of people experiencing some kind of rent burden in this group has nearly doubled between 2019 and 2024, going from 23% to 43%. And again, it's both rent burden and severely rent burdened. Now, people making between $75,000 and $99,000 also saw an increase in rent burden. What I thought was striking here is that now in 2024, about 1 in 5 people in this category are experiencing some kind of rent burden. And these are people, again, making between $75,000 and $99,000 a year. And then we did see an increase as well in people making over $100,000 from 1% to 5%, but these are pretty small numbers that we can't really interpret too much. Zooming out a little bit, thinking about how our region looks compared to the nation overall, this is a slide that my colleague Sam shared with you all last year that showed that Minneapolis is kind of in the middle of the pack when it comes to rent growth. So between 2023 and 2024, we saw a 0.9% increase in rents. This puts us 22 out of 50 in large metro areas across the country. However, between 2024 and 2025, that story changed a fair amount. We're now 9th on that list. So what this means is that, well, one thing to keep in mind that this is growth, so it's not rent. So we don't necessarily have higher rents than the East Bay or Orange County, but our rents are growing faster than the majority of other regions, metro regions on this list. And that's a 2.2% increase between 2024 and 2025. So finally then, zooming all the way back in, this graph shows rent increases for different communities across our region. Each line is a different community, and the slide allows us to just get a sense of just how much variability there is in rent growth across different communities in our region. Some communities saw a 65 to 80% increase since 2010. Other places saw 20 or 30% increases since 2010. And this slide nor this data is really the kind of thing we would look at to know why any particular community has the growth trajectory it does. You know, the reasons why are probably just as varied as the growth trajectories themselves, but the slide is important to highlight just how important it is to be able to plan and take into account these really locally specific trends because they vary so much across the region. And finally, we're back where we started. Our key takeaways from all this data: rents are still increasing. They have been since 2010 and before. They're increasing fastest for our most affordable units. They're increasing faster in our region than in other metro areas. That rent burden status is becoming more common, with more families experiencing severe rent burden. And there is important variation in rent growth by region and then by type of apartment. And I will hand it back over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do you want to pause for questions, Mr. Chair, on that
Any questions from
section, or-
committee members on what's been presented so far? Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, thank you, Chair and team for presenting. This is really important information every time we see it because it reminds us where we are. And, you know, in the news, we often hear about a housing crisis, and this kind of explains what that means. These questions have come up in our regular Met Council meetings, so I think this would be important to share at the Met Council level as well.
Agree.
Great.
Thank you. Any other discussion while we're paused? Seeing none, Ms. Smith.
Okay, switching to small area fair market rents. So just a reminder, small area fair market rents are fair market rents that are at the zip code level instead of one limit for the entire metropolitan area. And just that last slide that Caitlin showed shows the importance of having small area fair market rents. The Metro HRA serves almost 100 communities, and so as you could see by the slide Caitlin just showed, there's large variation in rents across the region. And so we, the council, you as policymakers, adopted these small area fair market rents back in 2020, and we continue with that recommendation this year. Really was adopted as a fair housing initiative to improve choice for voucher holders in all communities in the region. And Steve's gonna share some maps and some data with you that shows sort of the impact of the adoption of small area fair market rents. So it's making a difference, and that's an important piece of this. In terms of small area fair market rent adoption across the country, it's voluntary for most housing authorities. So there's 2,100 housing authorities in the country that are administering the Section 8 voucher program. 409 of those are mandated to use small area fair market rents. And HUD mandates that because these are agencies that have large concentrations of voucher holders in low poverty areas of the region. That number was 260 last year. So there's a number of mandatory agencies added. There are 93 agencies that have partial adoption. So they have what they call exception rents in some of their communities, but not their entire service area. And then there are 21 voluntary opt-in agencies. And we're one of those. And I think that's important to point out. So we're one of the very few agencies across the country that are adopting this method. And I think I should say too that this works well for agencies that have a large service area with lots of variation in rents by zip code. And so it makes a difference. Here's just another view of that. So this is a map of the country that shows the agencies that have adopted small area fair market rents. The darker blue areas have more small area fair market rent agencies. The gray areas have none, and you can see in our state, I believe we're the only agency that has small area fair market rents in Minnesota. This is a reminder. You see this map often, but I think it's an important reminder. This is the Metro HRA service area, so we serve all the areas in blue. Again, nearly 100 communities, all of Anoka County, all of Carver County, and then suburban Hennepin and Ramsey. The white areas shown on this map all have their own housing choice voucher programs. Across the entire region, there's 177 zip codes, and so when we come back next time for action, we'll be recommending payment standards for all of these zip codes. However, 79 of them fall within Metro HRA service area. So as we're talking today about options, we're going to focus on those 79. The Metro HRA has some very small programs that we operate across the entire region, and so that's why we adopt payment standards for all of the areas across the region. There are 12 zip codes that require a change. So the new small area fair market rents, the current payment standard is outside of the required range of 90 to 110%, and 7 of those zip codes are in Metro HRA's primary service area. It's interesting to look at the range of change in the small area fair market rents. So they change from an 11% decrease to a 13% increase. So quite a wide range of change, but many of those areas with the large fluctuations are outside of Metro HRA's primary service area. So throughout most of our service area, the changes were really between about 0 and 2%. When we're looking at the fair market rents, not the small area fair market rents, it's the lowest changes in the last 10 years for fair market rents. So it just gives us an idea. I think part of that is rents, or the fair market rents, are catching up to what's really happening in the market, I think is one thing. We made some really significant changes in our payment standards the last 2 years, and particularly last year, to bring our payment standards in line with where rents actually are. This is sort of our teeter-totter, the balancing act that we're playing each year when we're coming to you with this information item. But HUD says, here's your budget authority. In our case this year, we have $94 million. We have 7,300 vouchers, and HUD says, now take your money and go serve as many families as you can with that. Of course, if we have higher rent limits or higher payment standards, we can serve fewer families, but the families that we do serve will be successful in finding units. Payment standard is certainly only one component of that. But we have higher average subsidy rates, so could potentially serve less families. And then lower rent limits can, make it challenging for households to find a unit within the payment standard with which to use their voucher. We can potentially issue more vouchers, so it's really what's the sweet spot and what's the balancing act of all that. When we're looking at payment standards, we're looking at lots of things. So our friends in research gave us a list of rents that go by bedroom size and by community, so we can look at average rents for all of the communities that we serve. We're looking at vacancy rates. When vacancy rates are low, rents tend to go up. So we're looking at vacancy rates across the region, and we're looking at rent burden. So the percentage of current voucher holders that are paying more than 30% of their income towards rent, and we consider that rent burdened, and Caitlin talked a lot about that. And so each of our scenarios, we're going to talk about the tenant rent burden levels. In terms of tenant rent portions, this is just a little refresher crash course. If a household finds a unit within the payment standard, they pay 30% of their income towards rent. If they are renting a unit that's above the payment standard, they're paying 30% of their income plus the difference. That makes them rent burdened. And sometimes that's a choice because somebody may want a more expensive unit, or they like the location or the amenities. Sometimes that's not a choice because it's the only unit they can find. And then the other important component of this is tenants cannot pay more than 40% of their income at initial move-in. So when a household is issued a voucher, they're given a maximum rent amount. And that's different for each family because it's income-based. So it's the payment standard plus an additional amount based on their income. I'm going to pass to Steve to talk a little bit about the analysis he's done with the small area for market rents.
Thank you, Terry. I did an analysis on the change in payment standards and how it's impacted where participants are using their vouchers. We began setting payment standards by zip code in 2020. So this first map shows the change in payment standards between 2019 and 2025 for 2-bedroom units. We chose 2-bedroom because it's our most common unit size that we have, but the maps look similar for all the other bedroom sizes. And the dark purples on this map indicate higher payment standard increases. So now this map overlays the payment standard change with the change in assisted households. The yellow circles indicate that there are at least 5 fewer households in that zip code today compared to 2019. And the green circles indicate an increase of at least 5. And then the larger circles are showing a greater change. So looking at this, we've seen significant increases in voucher usage in Blaine, Maple Grove, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, in the northwestern portion of Brooklyn Park. These are communities that have seen large payment standards increases over the last 6 years. And then the zip codes with fewer households are generally the northern first-ring suburbs, and they've seen smaller payment standard increases. And then this last map is showing the current 2-bedroom payment standards and the household change over just the last year. Here the blue circles are increases and the yellow are decreases. Again, you can see that Maple Grove and Blaine have had a large increase in households, with Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and Vadnais Heights also showing some smaller increases. This shows that the shift in housing choice voucher participants to areas with higher payment standards is still ongoing. It wasn't just something that happened when we first implemented it. And then this last chart summarizes the data from the maps. Once again, this is looking at the payment standard change for 2-bedroom units between 2019 and 2025. There are 465 fewer households living in zip codes that saw a payment standard increase of less than $400. And then there's 122 fewer in zip codes with an increase of $400 to $600. Meanwhile, there were substantial increases in zip codes with payment standard increases of $600 or more. We saw the largest increase in families in areas with an increase of $800 to $999. So really the key takeaway of this is that setting payment standards by zip code using the small area FMRs has improved housing choice in the region as it expanded access to communities with historically low voucher usage.
Thank you, Steve. I think, when we first adopted small area fair market rents, we knew it was going to cost money because what it does, it allows people to move to higher rent areas. And without the small area fair market rents, that wouldn't be the case, so voucher holders would not be able to access some of these communities. So thank you for that, Steve. So this is a slide that shows steady increase in rents or average subsidy over time. So you can see that it's kind of small here, but the dotted line is a trend line, and then the solid line is the actual average per family subsidy cost. So the higher that goes, the less far our budget goes. You can see that back in 2018, the rents were higher than the trend line, and then it sort of reverses. And then you can see a spike over the last year in the 2025 column, and how that trend is sort of continuing. We've had historical increases in average subsidy over the last several years, and I think that's a couple of things. I think it's definitely the adoption of small area fair market rents. I think it's increasing rents, and it's really just bringing our payment standards in line with what average rents are doing. And so, as I indicated earlier, we did some substantial increases in payment standards last year and the year before. And so I think that's allowing families to move to more expensive units. And I think what we hope will happen now is that we did those large increases. I'm hoping that this will taper off a little bit. We don't know that for sure, but we hope the trajectory of the 8% increase over the last 5 years is going to start to level off now, but this is sort of a worst case scenario. I wanted to include this because I think it's an important part of the conversation. So the federal budget environment, as you all know, is very uncertain right now. And so the fiscal year 25 enacted budget for the Housing Choice Voucher Program was a little over $36 billion. And the program currently serves 2.4 million households across the country. The current or the proposed fiscal year 26 House bill is a reduction of that to $35.2 billion. And what that means on the ground is across the country, housing authorities would be serving 181 or almost 182 fewer households with vouchers, and that's an 8% reduction. And then what the Senate bill is a little bit of an increase in budget authority for the Housing Choice Voucher Program, but as rents are rising faster than the federal funding, it's still a 5% reduction in the number of households that would receive vouchers under these scenarios. And where the final budget will end up is anybody's guess, but this just gives us a little bit of flavor of what we're looking at. This is kind of a busy slide, but what I'm trying to project here is Based on average subsidy on the left there, our budget, just doesn't go as far. So as that average per family subsidy increases, it impacts the number of families we can serve. So as we indicated, 2025 budget is based on a 2024 continuing resolution. So it was flat funding from 2024, and that acts like a reduction for us. So all of these scenarios assumes for the next year or 2 years, our budget stays flat at 94 million, and we don't know if that'll be the case. So these are true worst-case scenarios. So today, our average subsidy is $1,200 per month. We started the year at $1,160, and so you can see how that increased throughout the course of the year. In order to serve all voucher holders at $1,200 for the entire year, we would need $105 million. Because we received 94 million, we'd be 11 million short to issuing all vouchers with an average subsidy of $1,200. And then you can see how that plays out. If our average subsidy increases to $1,225 or $1,250, that number becomes bigger. So the shortfall becomes a bigger number going forward. What we hope will happen is we get more than 94 million next year. Oftentimes when HUD awards funding, even during a continuing resolution, we get some inflationary funds. And so we hope that will be the case, but we just don't know where we'll be. So it could be we're gonna end this year down about 420 families from our baseline. So our funding wasn't enough to cover issuing all of our vouchers. And so depending on what happens with average HAP or our average subsidy payment, the number of families we can serve may change. Success rates are an important part of this. So success rate means the percentage of voucher holders that are issued vouchers for the first time coming off the waiting list that use the voucher. So it means they use it before it expires. There are lots of reasons that vouchers don't get used, and certainly one of those is they can't find a unit to use the voucher, but also maybe somebody moved out of the area, their circumstances changed, they found other housing. Lots of things can happen between the time a household applies for a voucher 3-5 years ago and they actually get the voucher. And so our success rate, we were happy to see the uptick in 2024 back up to 63%. And I think that is indicative of the payment standards that we've adopted that are competitive, allowing voucher holders success in using their vouchers. So that's sort of fluctuated over the years, but that's one of the things that we look at when we're adopting payment standards.
Sorry. Oh, my apologies. Councilmember Wolf, then Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would be really helpful to know how much of the people who couldn't use the voucher were for the first thing, that they couldn't find a unit, and whether that's that they truly couldn't find a unit or they have their own barriers to getting a landlord to accept them, because that really gives us clarity on the payment standards if we have that information. The other ones are, life things that stuff happens, but the unit availability, I think, is the biggest one.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Wolf, that's a really good thought and something we've been thinking a lot about. Could we send a survey to people whose vouchers expire, a little postcard so they could check the reason they didn't use their voucher? But aside from contacting households directly, but it's we would want to know it too. So we've been talking about how can we gather that information? Because what happens is when their voucher expires, we have a date in our system, we send them a letter saying, oh, your voucher expired, reapply. When the waiting list reopens again and we don't have any communication, two-way communication on why they didn't actually use it. But we would like to start gathering that, so maybe we start doing those postcards to start
Yeah, I agree,
gathering.
Councilmember Wolf. It would be useful. Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Carter.
I had exactly the same question about whether or not the voucher holder was having trouble getting a landlord to accept the voucher. And I think I had another thought about this. It'll probably come back to me later.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Carter.
And this isn't discussion, just a clarifying question. A little slower catching on because I haven't been in the voucher world as long, but I'm seeing the success rate as you're reporting it, as those voucher holders who in this year came off the waiting list and what their success rate was. I've heard in the housing arena a different number of utilization, voucher utilization, I believe, housing choice voucher utilization. And could you just help me get into my mind what the difference between these two rates that I'm hearing would be?
Sure.
The other one was higher.
Yes, sure. We don't have a success rate here for 25 because due to budget reductions or a flat budget, we haven't taken anybody off the waiting list for the whole year. So we don't have a success rate for 25, and we won't because we didn't issue any vouchers. But when we talk about utilization, it's the percentage of vouchers that we're actually using throughout the entire year. For example, this year, we have 7,300 vouchers. We will end this year at about 94% utilized. So 6% of our vouchers will go unused, and it's because we don't have enough money to serve those families. So that's sort of, when we talk about utilization, that's what we mean for that. And then success rates are for people that are coming off the waiting list that are actually able to use the voucher.
Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my follow-up is that we would issue then vouchers like airline seats with a risk of those vouchers being used to a certain percent within a year. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Carter, somewhat.
I
So
shouldn't say like
what
that.
happens is we have about 500 voucher holders go off the program every year for a variety of reasons. Normally, in a good year, when someone gives up their voucher, we give it to the next person on the waiting list. This year, we haven't been able to do that. So we just don't give those vouchers back out. So it's sort of,
Gotcha. I
the
see.
plane's not
There's
going to
a
be full
balance.
because we don't have enough money to fill up the plane.
Yeah, but we do have those that are coming back in.
Yes.
That's true. Thank you for the help.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you, Chair. So wouldn't having the housing authority run out of voucher money, wouldn't that be a reason for the voucher not to be used as well, or is that? That affects the success rate, doesn't it?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, no, the success, I think they're two separate things. So we're not even issuing the vouchers. So nobody's going to be successful with the voucher because we're not even reissuing it. But I don't know if I'm answering the question.
Yeah, I think you did. But the
Yeah.
other one is related to my other question is related to the voucher expiring. When you notify the voucher holder that their voucher is about to expire, and they might have an opportunity to reapply in the future if vouchers become available. Do you survey them? Is there some, like a postcard where they can scan the barcode or what do you call that?
QR.
QR code, thank you. And say, if you would like to find out more about this, scan the barcode and we'll tell you what the next steps are or something like that. It might, I don't know, that's just an idea, but I think capturing the information about what happened when they tried to use their voucher as it's about to expire, being creative with that. They're probably pretty motivated at that point to see what they can do. Maybe it's other resources, scanning the barcode from the postcard, or if they call in, I don't know. But taking advantage of that opportunity might be good to gather information.
Good point, Mr. Chair. And we have had outreach staff at times reach out to people whose vouchers about to expire within the next 30 days. What challenges are you facing? Is there anything we can help you with? Why haven't you used your voucher yet? So we have some anecdotal information about that, but collecting it more consistently would be good.
Thank you. Ms. Smith.
Okay, now we're gonna jump into the tough part. That was all background. I have 3 options here for consideration today. It's certainly not the only 3 options, but it's the three that we thought made some sense to present. So option one is to make minimal changes to bring the payment standards into the required range. So again, some of them, some of the current payment standards are below 90% or above 110, so we have to make adjustments. Number two would be sort of a re-benchmarking of sorts, re-benchmarking all payment standards at 100% of the new small area fair market rent. And then number three would be to make all the required changes in option one, but then bring payment standards that are above 100% down to 100%. And I'll talk about each one of those. So option one is the required changes only, and this would require one zip code to be increased because it's below 90%. We have 6 zip codes that would have to come down because they're above 110, and 72 zip codes would remain the same. So really making minimal changes under this scenario. Current rent burden of current voucher holders is 33%. So that's going to stay the same on all of these options because that's our current state. After full implementation of this option, future rent burden comes down to 28%. I don't remember if I said in a prior slide that HUD's sort of benchmark for that is they don't want to see your program with 40% or more of people rent burdened. And so all of these options will be below that 40% because we're starting below that. We have 25 tenants that will be impacted whose rent will increase. And that's because there's 25 tenants living in those 6 zip codes where the payment standard's coming down. The tricky part of that is the HUD rule requires us to not implement that for 2 years, to give people some time to prepare for a rent increase is essentially what will happen. So we have to manually, and Steve gets heart palpitations when we start talking about this because we have to manually track that hold harmless for those 25 families. So the higher payment standard, or the lower payment standard doesn't go into play until somebody moves or 2 years. So we have to track those. 25 we can handle, but you'll see some higher numbers in future slides. And all of these options cost a little bit to the HRA because rents are rising. And so this one would cost $275 to implement, $275,000, and that's enough to serve 20 households. This one is not discretionary. We have to make these changes to become compliant with the program rules. The second one is to adjust all zip codes to 100% of the new small area fair market rents. And it's making changes to every single zip code. This is what we did last year. And last year, it was a good thing to do because our average rents were higher than some of our payment standards when we did the analysis. This year, I'm not quite sure this is the right option, but we would have 57 zip codes that would go up in payment standard and 22 that would come down. And because of those 22 coming down, we'd have a hold harmless for over 1,000 families. So we have 1,000 families living in those 22 zip codes, so we would have to manually track all of those households until they move or from 2 years when we can change or increase the payment standard. And years back, we did do some decreasing of payment standards, and sometimes we bring them back up before the new payment standard ever even goes into play. And so because we look at this every single year, we can make changes, but anyway, that's a side note. But this one, again, current rent burden is 33%. Future rent burden is 27%, so it goes down a little bit. The cost to implement this option is $785,000, and that's the cost to the HRA. Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. At Housing Work Group, we polished up some of this language due to suggestions from Councilmember Chambliss, but I have that in purple because the 57 zip codes that are increasing in payment standard, that's why it would cost $785,000 to implement this option. And $785,000 is enough to serve 54 households, just to put that into context a little bit. This one is mandatory changes, so making the mandatory changes, but then also reducing all the payment standards that are above 100% down to 100%. So we have a bunch of zip codes, 22 of them that have payment standards that are between 100 and 110% of the new small area for market rent. So it would be bringing those down to the 100% mark. And we included that for budgetary reasons, because we know our federal funding is not looking like we're going to get all kinds of increases in our federal budget. So it's thinking from a budgetary standpoint. But under this scenario, again, we would have 900 tenants whose rent will eventually increase when they move or 2 years from now. So we'd be tracking manually those 900 households until they either move or 2 years from now. And this one doesn't cost as much as option 2, so it costs $260,000. That's because we only have 2 zip codes in this scenario that would actually increase. That costs us more if we increase the payment standards. And so this one isn't as expensive to implement, and $260,000 is enough to serve 18 households. Some things to think about as we're chatting about this today is flat funding in 2025, because our budget was based on a continuing resolution, reduced our program size by about 400. So as I indicated earlier, we'll be down by 400 households by the end of the year. Flat funding acts like a reduction. The 26 federal budget is very uncertain. We don't know how much money we can get, so it doesn't seem like it's a good time to increase payment standards. I was at a national conference a couple weeks ago, and housing authorities all over the country are decreasing payment standards. I'm not sure that's the right answer either. But I think this is an important point, the third bullet. Average rents that we received seem to fall in line with where our current payment standards are. And I think that's because we made some significant increases last year. So if we look at average rents in some of the communities where we have lots of people living or even a few people living, our current payment standards seem to fall within that. And so that makes me think we should hold flat a little bit for a year here. And then the rent burden piece. HUD's guidelines suggest that no more of 40% of voucher holders are rent burdened. And all of the options that we talked about today meet that threshold. And so now I just have them all on one screen so you can see them at a glance, and happy to answer questions and take thoughts.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Discussion on this report. First, Councilmember Carter, then Councilmember Lee.
Thank you. When I look at the 2 options, option number 1 and option number 3, which seem to be somewhat close in implementation costs, I wonder, and I'm not sure if you didn't already answer this question, so forgive me, I wonder whether you've calculated the difference in numbers of households that will be served, total vouchers that, well, there aren't going to be any, but numbers of households that will be served. I'll leave it that way.
Ms. Smith.
Yes, thank you for that. So it will be pretty close between the 2 options, because we won't be increasing payment standards in many zip codes under either option. The third option, because people will be living in areas that have a decreased payment standard, those 900 households, that option may in a few years cost us less, because we're reducing payment standards for those 900 households. But that doesn't happen immediately. It happens as people move or 2 years from now. And so we may end up changing payment standards again before we get to that point. But in the end, option 3 should cost us a little less. Do you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah, I think it would be more of a change over the next couple of years, more than this, more than in 2026.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have in queue Councilmembers Lee, then Wolf, then Chambliss. Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, this morning on Facebook, I saw an article, a very sobering article. It was either Bring Me the News or MinPost, that said that a lot of our homeless folks are actually working folks who are actually holding down at least one job. And so in the first part of the presentation, I was wondering, do we know why Class C rent is climbing higher than Class A rents?
Ms. Smith.
Do you want to try it?
Or is that you, Ms. Hamrock?
I don't know. I think that would be me.
Yeah.
I don't,
Yes, please, please.
I don't know. there's probably 6 or 7 different reasons that kind of come together that would have to do with starting rents, right? If your rent is starting lower, there's more space for it to climb than if it's starting higher. But it also has to do with how the different apartment buildings come to be and come to be in those classes. So Class A buildings are largely new builds, but as they get older, they shift into Class B and Class C. And so you'll see the presence of new building or new buildings in that class affecting what the rents are as well. So there's probably even a few more that I'm not even thinking of, but a multitude of reasons why those rents will be changing at different rates.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, good question. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So that 900 households, do you have to manually do 900 households? Because that gives me pause. I mean, in terms of fairness, when we're so resource constrained, I would ideologically like the option 3 because it puts people in a narrower range that, because it's not really fair to have some people at 90% and some people at 110. But the staff time and complexity of dealing with 900 manual adjustments seems excessive. So for that reason only, I'm tending towards option 1, even though I feel bad about it because it doesn't seem fair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Councilmember Wolf, I agree with you. My staff recommendation would have been option 3 minus, except for that 900 households. We're gonna mess it up. Anything manual that you're doing that much of, it's just hard to catch everything. And our software doesn't build something in, maybe for a future revision. We can get them to build something in for it, but it would be problematic for us, which is the reason I would recommend option 1.
Thank you, good point. Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, I'm just looking at the decrease in the number of zip codes served when the whole purpose of implementing this new zip code program is to give people more access to, quality locations, and, maybe quality apartments, maybe more safe neighborhoods. So,
That decrease is not in zip code served, that's decrease in the payment standard for the zip code.
can you explain to me if I'm getting that wrong? Can you explain that better for me?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss, under the option 1 there, the 4th bullet, we'd be decreasing payment standards in 6 zip codes. There are 25 households living in those 6 zip codes right now. So eventually, their payment standard will decrease. They don't have to move. They don't have to do anything different. It's just the payment standard will decrease. And that decreased payment standard will go into effect either when they move, number 1, or number 2, 2 years from now. And that's the manual tracking. So we will have to do the manual tracking for those 25 households in option 1 because it's not a discretionary change.
Okay.
Does that
Yeah,
help?
thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Makes sense? Great. Further discussion, further questions?
Yes.
No?
Just really appreciating the thoughtfulness of the recommendation coming forward. And were it not for the 900 and the difficulty there, I would also be looking toward number 3 just because of the sense of serving potentially more families over time. I too understand how complex keeping track of the red 900 would be, as would be keeping track of the red 1040, and would prefer the burden of the 25. That happens to be Black in households in number 1. That was a good cue.
Thanks, and I feel very similar, in a very similar way to Councilmember Wolf, Councilmember Carter, that 900 is a lot of households to track. I mean, it may save us money in the future, but I'm not quite clear how much it's gonna cost us between now and when we realize any kind of savings, and just, I don't know, just sort of instinctively, I guess, making minimal changes as option one includes, just seems like a smart thing to do when you're really uncertain about what's coming in the future. And that's kind of where we are. Yeah, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, I think uncertainty is a big one, a big factor here. I'm coming from a IT background. The data part doesn't seem as big of a threat to me. You know, I don't know what the system looks like, or if you can download data and then customize it. But there can be solutions for that. I'm more concerned about family impact than I am about how to manage the data, because usually you can find solutions for that.
Thank you. Anything else, committee members? Ms. Smith, do you want to wrap it? Yep.
So October 20th, here we are. November 3rd, we'll be back for action and a recommendation that will go to the full council on November 12th, and then we'll implement the new payment standards Q1 of 2026. And then just to sprinkle some sunshine on us all
Thank you.
this evening, we have the Bring It Home vouchers coming. And so we're going to be getting about enough funding to serve about 900 families with that program, and hopefully we can have some vouchers on the street Q1 of 2026 for that program. And so certainly doesn't make up for the loss on the federal program, but it's a bright light in the sky for us that we get to implement that new program. So
Great, thank you. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do I remember correctly that those can be used for people that are already in a unit that are cost burdened?
yeah, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Wolf, yes, they are required to be used by people that are rent burdened. We can do what's called a lease in place preference that allows preference for people that are already living in a unit that are rent burdened to get the voucher. So quick lease ups and utilization of the vouchers.
Thank you.
Great, so look forward to that. Also, just going to acting on Councilmember Chambliss' suggestion, I think it would be good to circulate this to all council members and not just the committee members. And unfortunately, the newest committee members are the ones who had to be absent today. I think this would have been a good review or good training for them. But yeah, if this could be, please be circulated to all council members. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest. Cool.
Mr. Chair, one more thing.
Yeah, please.
Councilmember Morales was at the housing work group with Councilmember Chambliss last Friday when we presented this, or
Great.
2 Fridays ago. He had some good thoughts, and some of that is reflected in the slides today. We polished some things up. So he had some good thoughts on the rise in HAP costs in future years and what that looks like. So we added a slide to address that. But
cool.
thank you to Councilmember Chambliss and Councilmember Morales.
Yeah, Ms. Smith, thanks to you, thanks to your team, those that we see here and those that we don't. Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
One more thought. I was reading something recently that they were tracking who's moving into Minnesota and out of Minnesota at different income levels, and that statewide, we're losing people at all of the higher income levels on the net. And the only place that we're gaining people was at that bottom. I think it was like below $35,000 a year income. Do we have any information about that at the regional level, or do they only track that at the state level?
Yeah, Director Bras.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Councilmember. That's a great question for our research team, because I know we look at it as part of our overall regional forecast. So I can follow up with our team members. I saw that article too. I didn't get a chance to read it, but I can follow up with our research team on it.
Because that would be good to know, and that could have an impact on our Class C rents too, if we're having more and more competition at the bottom from people coming into the region as well.
Thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you very much, and thank you for your work, and we'll see you here on November 3rd. Cool. Committee members will move into our final information item today. It's the Small Communities Planning Program and the 2050 Planning Assistance Grant Program funding considerations. Ms. Torres, welcome.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. It's good to see you all again. I'm Angela Torres, the Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance. I'm here to bring an update to you on LUAC conversations about funding considerations for the two programs that we've been talking about for quite some time, the Small Communities Planning Program and the 2050 Planning Assistance Grant Program. We'll just jump right in, share an overall budget, which we now have an established programmatic budget. We'll talk about an update to the proposed incentive grants that are part of the Planning Assistance Grant Program. The bulk of our conversation will be in reviewing the LUAC conversation about funding scenarios and priorities for these programs. And then we'll talk about the tentative schedule and open the conversation for discussion. The overall planning assistance fund budget has been set at $5.64 million. This includes three things, though. It includes the planning assistance grants themselves, 2 incentive grants, and the Small Communities Planning Program engineering costs. This table shows 3 scenarios for distribution of the program funds for different program goals. We'll discuss the individual scenarios in more detail in a couple of slides, but this shows the overview of the 3 programs, the budget needs for those programs, and options for expending the budget. I also want to mention that this table shows the result of a calculation error that inadvertently left additional dollars in the program budget. The calculation used $5.6 million instead of $5.64 million. Obviously, that's a better problem to have than the opposite. This table has been updated to reflect those additional dollars. Since the programmatic goal is to expend all of the budget dollars, given the discussion at LUAC and in previous conversations with you all, we would recommend that these funds get added to the Small Communities Planning Program engineering costs. And this would increase each eligible community's allocation by $2,500 and expend all but $1,500 of the total budget. So that would be consistent with the conversations we've been hearing thus far. One other change to note since our last meeting, we were here in August, I believe, is that the incentive grants must be fully funded and cannot be partially funded based on anticipated participation. Once our grant and finance folks heard about the proposal, they're like, no, you can't do that. And so we did ask for additional budget to cover this need, but this is a change to the previous proposal. This expectation aligns with the revised budget, and as I mentioned, the additional dollars were secured to meet this need, this requirement. The recommendation for a $14,000 maximum for each eligible community to increase their award amounts remains the same, but staff suggests that the incentive program award amounts shift slightly. The amount of effort that integrated equity planning takes, different engagement approaches, community-specific planning approaches. Staff would recommend that the Advancing Regional Goals Incentive Award be increased to $10,000 per community, and the Early Plan Submittal Award be revised to $4,000 per community. It was previously suggested as an even split, but these amounts really better reflect the effort needed to meet the goals of each incentive grant while providing a higher level of assistance where it will likely be needed most. This is Table 2 from your staff report. For the Planning Assistance Grant Program, LUAC reviewed 3 scenarios for discussion using the 3 community types for award amounts, sewered, unsewered, and whether you are a county or consortium. Just as a reminder, Scenario A reflects the same funding amounts from the 2040 planning cycle as a baseline and as applied to the communities that meet the new recommended eligibility criteria. Scenario B uses an inflation-adjusted approach to the baseline funding amounts. Scenario C applies a minor reduction to each inflation-adjusted award amount to support the engineering costs for the Small Communities Planning Program. LUEC discussed scenarios B and C, didn't consider scenario A as anything more than a baseline. They favored scenario C, indicating that the minor reduction to individual planning grants to support other programs, like the Small Communities Planning Program, was far outweighed by the impact of additional assistance for small communities. Discussion from LUEC members really further emphasized that both scenarios B and C were significant increases from the grants that were provided in the 2040 planning cycle at 34% and 25% for scenarios B and C respectively. LUEC discussed options for funding engineering
I'm sorry, Ms.
services.
Torres. Question from Councilmember Chambliss, please.
Yeah, maybe she was going to get to this, but I was kind of curious about what the LUAC committee felt about these increases. Can you provide any more background on?
Well, they were really focusing on the increases as a small decrease to support the engineering costs, given that the planning grants for scenarios both B and C were such a significant increase from the 2040 planning cycle, that they were looking at the total impact to support small communities was their priority.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Thank
Yeah.
you.
I mean, I don't know that much about the engineering piece, but,
We'll get to that in just a second.
pardon?
We'll get to that in just a
Oh,
second.
okay.
Yeah,
All right, Ms. Torres, please.
okay. In fact, this slide talks about engineering costs. So LUEC discussed options for funding engineering services for the Small Communities Planning Program. This is Table 1 from your staff report. It outlines the total engineering cost by plan type, so wastewater, water supply, surface water management, for the 29 eligible Small Communities Program communities. This is the total budgetary need. But engineering services needed for each community are unique to the type of wastewater and water supply services that exist, and as well as the local surface water conditions, which are harder to predict. Wastewater planning considers if services are provided either through the regional or a municipal wastewater system or via individual septic systems. The amount of effort for that planning type is significant. Water supply planning considers where water supply is obtained, whether that's a public water supply of some sort or private wells. Surface water depends on a variety of factors, like the level of assistance from local watershed district or water management organizations, as well as impaired waters and the level of planning needed to protect them. You'll see that surface water management plans are a single estimate for all communities, and that's because it's harder to predict the needs for surface water management plans. And so our colleagues in environmental services really provided the overall estimate, thinking that it would be best to use a community average cost, given the number of different variables that aren't tied to the community type specifically. One more slide on engineering costs, and then I'll circle back to Councilmember Chambliss to see if we've answered her questions. Table 4 from the staff report identifies the range of costs by community type and budget scenario for all of the 29 eligible communities. This identifies the possible budget allocation for each local government based on the type of services that are provided. The table shows how many communities fall into each type and the estimated costs to accomplish water planning for those
Ms. Torres, I think, did you want to advance your slide? I think.
Oh, sorry.
Thanks. There we go.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I lost my place. So this table shows how many communities fall into each type and the estimated cost to accomplish water planning for those communities. Even though the communities are small, there are different engineering needs. This information was the baseline for LUAC's discussion. And LUAC, after indicating a preference for scenario C, had a general consensus around providing a not-to-exceed engineering allocation for program participants. And scenario C allows for an estimated budgetary allocation towards engineering costs based on participants' need, the expected planning effort, their community type for wastewater services, their community type for water supply, and the not-to-exceed allocation provides that option for local governments to prioritize the type of planning that might be most important for their local community. So they're not specifically tied to, while the estimates are based on the types of services that they are receiving in their community, they're not required by the proposal to specifically spend that much on wastewater, that much on water supply, and that much on surface water. They're able to have cost savings and then just use that pool of money to complete their engineering, their water planning for the community. We do want to note, though, that if there are any additional engineering costs, that would be the responsibility of the local government to provide those funds. This week, the full Met Council will review the eligibility criteria that you voted on at the last CDC meeting for both of these programs. In November, the LUAC will make recommendations to the CDC on the conversations that they've been having about the funding scenarios and priorities, the information that we've reviewed today. And the CDC and Met Council are then tentatively scheduled to review those recommendations in December, hopefully with adoption of these last programmatic recommendations by the end of the year. So I do have a few questions for the committee's consideration, but I'll turn it back to the chair now for discussion and questions.
Thank you, Ms. Torres, for the work and for the presentation. Ms. Torres has suggested some questions for us, but any discussion, questions, comments are welcome. Oh. Yeah, Councilmember Carter and then Councilmember Wolf.
Thankful for the staff work and the review of LUAC and the recommendations coming forward. It does appear that the holding back of those funds to support engineering makes sense. And I'm thankful for the opportunity to be able to support these communities who have the various scenarios that have been pointed out here. And to know that that work, if it does come out to be even more, is going to be their responsibility, but that we are able to, with scenario 3, make that contribution, and that they know it's there to support all of their work. So I think that I would prefer, given all of the work that's gone on to this, to support that recommendation and to be thankful to all who've planned this work and put it before us, including Wendy. I'm sure you were part of those discussions at LUAC as well.
At the beginning, yeah,
Yeah,
not lately.
okay.
So that was scenario C, correct? Councilmember, thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't really have any strong feelings. I mean, since scenario C is fine, I don't have any objections to it. My only concerns are on the grant for advancing regional goals and how that would be implemented, like how much you have to do and whether it's appropriate to use general fund money to reward certain communities for doing extra on their plans when some communities aren't getting any assistance at all and will be spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on their other plans. To give an example, so Farmington qualifies for the program, so they would be eligible for this advancing regional goals if we went ahead with that. But like when you look at their housing numbers, there aren't big gaps. Like when you look at home ownership, everybody is in a very small cluster, even when you disaggregate by race. And there's not displacement because it's generally greenfield development or redevelopment of blighted properties where the person, that are, nothing going on, or the person is happily selling and going somewhere else. So it's not the same dynamic. I don't understand if it's really, what would they do in order to get the money?
Ms. Torres?
Chair and committee members, we would include that in the grant contract. They would have to supply a work plan that we would approve, and they get to decide that for themselves, how they are doing that. It has to be sufficient to be above and beyond the minimum requirements that the council has in policy, but I think that it's important to allow for flexibility for a community to determine how they are going to do that work. We do have in Imagine 2050 frameworks that they can use and adopt into their local plans if they like, for equity and environmental justice, anti-displacement, community-centered engagement, and connecting with the American Indian communities. We have those things in Imagine 2050, and they can use that as a framework if they choose. It's something that we would work on as a work plan with the communities at the time of the agreement.
Thank you.
It feels very subjective to me, and I'm hesitant to hand out money on a subjective basis rather than objective criteria.
Thank you. And so this is the recommendation of a $10,000 grant for the eligible communities, correct, Ms. Torres? Okay, thank you. Thanks. Councilmember Lee, then Councilmember Chambliss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to concur with the LUAC recommendation for scenario C. I think these committee folks are made up of very diverse folks from all over the community, and they bring a lot of passion and expertise and lived experience, and so it would behoove us to listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Oh, just thanks for sharing the perspective of LUAC and how the money was divvied up between the advancing regional goals and the early plan submission incentive. It makes sense to have that not be a 50-50 split and focus on advancing the goals and getting the impact that we want for our communities. I don't have, I'm okay with what LUAC has recommended for scenario C.
Thank you, Councilmember. For the discussion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is LUAC done discussing that portion of it? I know they got not all the way through in September on their, or I think I remember they got not all the way through. So they haven't completely gone through all of this, have they, or have they?
Ms. Torres.
Chair and committee members, they have made it through all of the conversation. Yes, they did that when we met in September.
Okay.
And we do have another conversation in November that will bring forward a business item, but of course, conversation and discussion will continue at that November meeting as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? So, Ms. Torres, I could support scenario C as well. I really appreciate LUAC and the work that they're doing. I appreciate Councilmember Wolf's raising these concerns, although I do think, for me, there seems to be a rationale that if we're going to put out these regional priorities, that we're kind of putting our money where our mouths are and supporting these communities with incentive grants. I think that's a good thing. So, yeah. All right. Ms. Torres, did you get what you need?
I did very much. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
I didn't have 40 slides like the HRA folks did.
Right. You get extra credit points for only having 10 slides here.
No shame.
It's always my goal, 10 slides.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Michelle, anything for the committee?
No, Chair, thank you.
Director Barajas, cool. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making the quorum. I'm glad we could get some business done tonight. So seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.